Let's build our C# application again, but this time we'll be using Visual Studio. Anytime you're going to create a new application in Visual Studio, you'll want to go to the File menu and select New Project, or New Website if you're creating a website. We're going to choose Project. Inside of this New Project dialog, there'll be categories for all the different types of applications you can create with Visual Studio. So you can create Silverlight applications, workflow applications, applications that run inside of Microsoft Office. I'm going to select the Windows category because that's where we're going to find console application. Down here I can give my console application a name. We'll call this Hello World VS for Visual Studio, and it's going to be located in the temp directory. Once I click OK, Visual Studio comes out and creates a number of files for me to get started. So this is program.cs. This is the source code for my application, everything I have so far. We already have some namespaces that are included for us. These are commonly used namespaces that you will be seeing in .NET quite a bit. We don't need all these namespaces for this simple application, but we'll leave them in place. This is an example of putting our code inside of our own namespace. So by default, our top-level namespace for the class that's in program.cs is going to be inside of a namespace called Hello World VS. We have our program class, and inside of our program class is our main method. One difference here compared to the program that we wrote from the command line is that this main method takes a parameter. It's an array of string called args. It's an array because of the bracket characters that are here. I'll show you how to use that in just a bit, but for now we'll go ahead and put in our console.writeLine and say hello world, and then we'll put in a console.readLine. That's going to force someone to press a key before the program can exit, so it's going to be stuck on this line until it can read something from the console. Before we go to run this, I'm going to point out a window here inside of Visual Studio. It's the Solution Explorer window. The solution that we are working on is called Hello World VS, and there is a solution file on the disk that can organize one or more projects. So on very large applications, you can have multiple projects inside of this solution. So I can come in, I can say add, new project, create another console application, or maybe a class library that's going to have some reusable code that I share across multiple projects in this solution. And I can break large applications up into multiple projects to make it easier to manage and work on. We're just building something simple, so we're going to stick with one project. It's called Hello World VS. That's the project. And what a project can do is manage multiple assets to build a single assembly. So to build a single exe file or a single library, a DLL file. As we get farther into this course, we'll find that we need to add multiple .cs files into a project, and that's very easy to do. I can come in and I can say add class, and Visual Studio will create another .cs file for me. So in this case, it's just called class1. In large applications, what people typically do is they will create folders and organize their classes into different folders. So let's just call this folder logic, and I'll put class1 inside of logic for right now. We're not actually going to do anything with class1. It's just going to sit there in our project and be empty and not do anything. But I'll show you how what you see here in the Solution Explorer window is going to be mimicked on the file system. So let me take the Solution Explorer window and dock it back over here on the right side. And now I'm going to come to the Build menu. When I tell Visual Studio to build a solution, what it does is go through each project that is inside of that solution and in turn tell that project to build. And the project can then invoke the C# compiler or the Visual Basic compiler and pass all of the assets and .cs files that are inside of the project to the C# compiler to have it produce a library or an executable. Let's go ahead and do a build, and we'll get an output window. Let me show you this. This is the output from the C# compiler. So it tells us that it was able to build this project. Nothing failed, nothing was skipped, and it even shows us where it put the output. So the output went to helloworldvs.exe, and that's underneath of my temp directory. Let's go out to the command line and take a look at this and run it. So under my temp directory, there's helloworldvs. Inside of here, you'll find a .sln file. That is the solution file. There's information inside of that file. It's a textual file. Information inside that file about what projects are included in this solution. Then typically you'll find a subfolder for each project that is inside of your solution. So if I go and change directory into Hello World VS again, this is my project directory. It's inside of here where I will find the .csproj file. That's the project file in my Solution Explorer window. The .csproj file is an XML file that has a list of all the .cs files in my project and other settings that I need to build my application. You'll see program.cs is inside of here. And there's also a directory called logic. So that's mapping directly to the logic folder that we created here. If we go inside of logic, there's class1.cs that we had added to our project up here. Now by default, when you are creating projects inside of Visual Studio and telling them to build, the executables don't get built into the root directory. They get built into a subdirectory. In this case, we have to go into the bin directory for binaries. And you can build things in debug or release mode. So release mode builds are made for production applications that need to run very fast. Debug mode builds are the ones you'll have by default. They have a number of flags set that make it easier to step through with a debugger and find problems in your application. Let's move into the debug directory. And here's where we find our executable, helloworldvs.exe. There's also some other files in here that facilitate debugging, but we can run our program. And it'll say hello world, and then wait for us to press another key before it exits. Before we leave this example, let's do one more thing. I'm going to come back into program.cs, and I'm going to read one of the entries that comes in through this args parameter. For console mode applications, this args parameter represents parameters that were passed on the command line. In other words, if I type in helloworldvs.exe Scott, that text Scott should be passed into my program as the first argument. Let's see if we can do that. I'm going to create a local variable called name, and to that I will assign the first element in the argument array. So arrays in C# are 0 based. The first element is in index 0, and you index into the array using those square brackets. And now I want to write that name out. There's a couple different ways I can do that. One is to simply take that string hello and a comma, and then add this name. The addition operator, when applied to strings in .NET, will simply concatenate two strings together. This isn't always the most performant way to put strings together, but it's very simple and it's going to work for our application. Every time we make a change like this, we need to come up and do a build so that all of the latest code is compiled into our executable file. And now let's try to run hello world VS and pass in Scott. And we get hello Scott. Press another key, and our program is finished.